He boarded the plane alone, a sharply dressed black man with eyes that scanned his surroundings more out of habit than curiosity, as if anticipating something no one else could see. His seat was in first class, but the way the flight crew looked at him said they didn't think he belonged there. He wasn't loud. He wasn't disruptive. But the moment he asked for help, when his chest tightened and his breath faltered, the silence from those meant to assist him said everything. What began as a panic attack thousands of feet in the air unraveled into a chain of humiliation, cruelty, and ignorance that exposed far more than anyone on board ever imagined. What no one knew, not even those who dismissed him, was that this man wasn't just another passenger. He was the quiet storm the entire airline industry would soon have to answer to. Before you watch the full story unfold, hit like and subscribe for more intense, real-world inspired dramas. Comment where you're watching from and let us know, how would you have reacted if you were on that flight? Lennox Hale stepped into the bustling terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport with the weight of the morning already bearing down on him. His suitcase glided silently behind him, and in his right hand, he clutched a leather briefcase that bore the faded initials LH. The early sunlight streaked through the high windows, casting long, gold bars across the tile floor as he navigated toward gate B26. His tailored gray trench coat fit him like armor, shoulders squared, every step practiced and calm. Yet underneath the surface, Lennox was unraveling. His chest felt tight, too tight, and the weight in his lungs wasn't the usual pressure of air travel. It was deeper, older, the kind of breathlessness that had nothing to do with altitude. He made it to the gate nearly 2 hours early, a personal ritual he never skipped. Crowds agitated him. So did lateness, disordered noise. He sat quietly in a corner seat, hands clasped in his lap, trying not to let the creeping wave of anxiety crest. He inhaled deeply through his nose, slowly exhaled through his mouth. Then again. A few nearby passengers watched, puzzled. He was unaware of their stares, or more accurately, he pretended not to notice. At the gate, a tall woman with a sharp nose, neatly cropped blonde hair, and a uniform that fit too tight across her shoulders peered at her manifest with disinterest. Coraline Wexler, senior flight attendant, 19 years with the airline, known for being disciplined, firm, unflinching, and in hushed whispers, unapologetically cruel. Coraline's eyes swept across the waiting crowd like a searchlight scanning for misfits. She paused when she saw Lennox. He stood, walked up with his boarding pass held out, briefcase in hand. His pulse thudded behind his temples. She stared at the pass, then at him. "Sir," she said, her voice coated in manufactured sweetness, "this is for first class." He nodded once. "That's correct." 2A. Coraline didn't move to scan it right away. She tilted her head, like she was squinting into a reflection that didn't make sense. "Just double-checking. We've had issues with mistaken upgrades before." Her voice dropped to a murmur. "You'd be surprised." Lennox forced a smile. "I bought the ticket." She scanned it without another word, then stepped aside, allowing him through. But not before whispering to the agent next to her, "Keep an eye. He looks shaky already." He boarded the aircraft early, finding his seat without assistance. 2. A window seat, exactly where he wanted to be. The cabin air was cool, crisp. White leather seats, polished wood finishes. He sat down, placed his briefcase under the seat, then took a moment to close his eyes. It didn't take long for the pressure in his chest to tighten again. He had always struggled with panic attacks, especially before flights. Something about being trapped in an aluminum tube 35,000 feet above sea level triggered the worst in him. He'd learned to manage it through therapy, breathing exercises, sometimes medication. This morning, he had skipped the pill. Too tired, too busy, too proud. He pulled out the paper bag from his coat pocket. The soft crackle of the paper as he opened it was barely audible, but somehow it cut through the quiet. A woman across the aisle glanced at him, confused. A man 3 rows back snorted softly, then muttered something under his breath to his wife. Lennox closed his eyes again, began to breathe. In, out, in, out. Coraline emerged from the galley, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the cabin. When she saw him breathing into the bag, her pace slowed. She watched him for a moment before stepping closer. "Sir," she said, loudly enough for 3 nearby passengers to hear. "Is there a problem?" He lowered the bag slightly, eyes opening. "Just a little anxiety. It'll pass." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you experiencing a medical emergency?" "No, ma'am. Just nerves. It's controlled." Coraline's lips thinned. She opened a small drawer from her cart and pulled something out, then dropped it onto his tray table. A small tin of mints. "Try one," she said with a slight smirk. "Might help you calm down." A few chuckles drifted from behind. Lennox looked at the mints, then back at her. "Thank you," he said, voice even, though inside something frayed. She leaned in slightly. "If you need to deplane, now's your window. Before we close the doors." "I'm fine. If you're sure." Her tone was loaded with disbelief, as if daring him to insist. He returned to the paper bag, resuming his breathing. The anxiety pulsed in his temples, now mixed with the heat of embarrassment. His face flushed. He could feel the eyes. Watching, judging, laughing. Behind her, a couple whispered to each other, clearly amused. Coraline returned to the front cabin, where another attendant asked quietly, "Is he okay?" Coraline shrugged. "He's flailing already. Probably his first time up here." The other attendant hesitated. "He has a first-class pass." Coraline's response came quick. "So do promo sweepstakes winners." Lennox couldn't hear her words, but he could read her face. And everyone else's. He sank deeper into the seat, eyes locked on the back of the seat in front of him. The engines hadn't even fired up yet, and already he felt like the plane was collapsing in on him. He wasn't a stranger to discomfort. But this was different. This was something colder. The first-class cabin, once a symbol of privilege and calm, now felt like a stage, every glance a spotlight, every whispered word an echoing judgment. His eyes scanned the small space between rows, carefully avoiding Coraline Wexler's gaze. He knew she was watching. She had made it clear. And in the back of his mind, he feared she was waiting for him to slip further, to collapse, to scream, to panic enough to justify whatever she already believed about him. The rumble beneath his feet signaled pushback. The plane began its slow reverse from the gate. A ding chimed overhead as the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, welcoming passengers, confirming the flight duration, the weather over Chicago, the expected arrival. None of it reached Lennox. He was focused on controlling the shallow breaths, the creeping numbness in his fingers, the sweat forming behind his neck. But then it happened. A sharp, uncontrollable gasp forced its way from his lungs. The bag fluttered. His hand jerked upward instinctively, clutching his chest. His body curled slightly as his head dipped. A short, muffled wheeze escaped his throat, loud enough for the passengers in 1A and 2B to glance in alarm. Coraline, standing near the front galley, turned immediately. Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked annoyed. She took 3 deliberate steps toward Lennox, heels clicking, lips curled in subtle disdain. She crossed her arms, glanced at the other passengers, then addressed him, not with concern, but performance. "Sir," she said loudly, "you need to calm down. We haven't even taken off." Lennox didn't respond. His lips moved, but no words came out. He was trying to breathe, to push air into lungs that wouldn't obey. Coraline exhaled heavily, rolling her eyes. "Drama queen alert," she said to no one in particular, loud enough to be heard across the first-class cabin. "Some people will do anything for attention." A ripple of awkward laughter passed through the section. Not everyone laughed, but no one stopped her. A man in 3C chuckled, shaking his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Can't handle a little turbulence before takeoff." A woman in 2B, a younger professional with brown eyes and a concerned expression, unbuckled her seatbelt. "Excuse me," she said to Coraline, her voice cautious but firm. "He looks like he's in trouble." "Shouldn't you?" Coraline cut her off. "He said it's just nerves. If he's that sensitive, maybe he should have driven." The woman blinked. "I don't think that's appropriate, ma'am," Coraline interrupted, her tone sharpening. "Please stay seated. We are moments from takeoff. If he truly needed help, he would have asked for it." Lennox tried. His mouth opened again, this time barely forming the words. I can't breathe." Coraline stared down at him for a beat. Then, in a mocking tone, she parroted, "Can't breathe," and scoffed. "Sir, you're speaking. You're breathing. Calm yourself, or I will need to involve security once we land." The woman in 2B looked horrified. "He needs oxygen. Can't you at least check?" "The medical kit is for emergencies," Coraline snapped. "And the pilot hasn't declared one." She turned to the junior attendant behind her, nodding sharply. The younger woman stepped forward reluctantly, glancing between Coraline and Lennox. "Should I?" "No," Coraline said. "Return to pre-flight checks." The engine whirred louder now, the plane accelerating. Lennox bent forward, his head nearly on his knees, his hands trembling over the crumpled paper bag. His suit jacket clung to his damp shirt. Every breath sounded like a war. Every second felt like an hour. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some watched. Some pretended not to. No one stood up. No one called out. The cabin air felt colder, harsher. Lennox, still bent forward, felt the sting of humiliation more acutely than the panic. He had been sick before, but this wasn't just illness. This was exposure. This was degradation. In that moment, he felt invisible and hypervisible all at once. A ghost and a spectacle. Coraline lingered near the front for another few moments, arms folded, waiting for him to either collapse or comply. When he did neither, just continued gasping quietly into his lap, she turned her back and walked away. The woman in 2B leaned toward him, whispering, "Sir, do you want me to press the call button?" "Should I?" Lennox shook his head faintly. He couldn't speak, but his eyes said it all. He was afraid. Afraid to speak, afraid to resist. Afraid it would only make things worse. And beneath that fear was shame. Crippling, searing shame. Not because he was panicking, but because they were watching, judging, laughing. Lennox Hale sat motionless in 2A, his back pressed tightly against the seat, his hands clenched into fists on his thighs, and his breathing erratic despite his efforts to regain control. The panic attack had not fully passed. It had simply coiled into something quieter, more dangerous, a silent war raging beneath his skin. Every glance, every whisper, every mocking smirk from the other passengers echoed louder in his head than the jet engines outside. He had been publicly shamed, dismissed, and invalidated. Yet it was the isolation now, the emotional quarantine, that tightened around him like a noose. He couldn't shake the image of Caroline Wexler's disdain, nor the way she had turned his genuine distress into a public performance. Her voice still rang in his ears, sarcastic, loud, indifferent, as if mocking him from every corner of the cabin. He reached slowly into his inner coat pocket and retrieved a small inhaler, not for asthma, but a fast-acting medication his doctor had prescribed for high-stress flights. He held it in his lap, stared at it, then returned it quietly. He couldn't use it now, not after she'd already framed him as a spectacle. If he needed help, he'd have to ask. But the thought of doing so filled him with dread. He had seen how his last cry for help had been weaponized against him. And still, the pressure in his chest grew heavier. With a trembling hand, he reached up and pressed the call button. It illuminated with a soft chime. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then Coraline appeared again, her expression composed but her body language tense. She didn't crouch beside him or lower her voice. Instead, she spoke as if addressing a courtroom. "Yes, Mr. Hale?" she asked, eyes narrow. "Still having your episode?" Lennox struggled to find his voice. Please, I need something. I can't breathe properly. Maybe oxygen or just water." Coraline's brow arched, a performative gesture meant for her audience, not him. "Mr. Hale, you've been breathing just fine for the past 10 minutes. There's no medical emergency here." Her voice rose slightly, ensuring the passengers nearby could hear. "You're refusing to calm down, and frankly, that's becoming a disruption to the cabin." Lennox stared at her in disbelief. "Please," he said, quieter now, desperate. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need help." Coraline turned without answering and reached for the cabin intercom. The tone that followed her touch on the microphone was calm, but her voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said with affected cheer, "please remain calm. We have a passenger in first class refusing to settle, but everything is under control. No need for alarm." A collective shift ran through the cabin, shoulders tensed, necks craned subtly, and several people leaned closer to windows or phones to avoid eye contact. Lennox's heart sank. His request for help had just been reframed as a threat, an inconvenience, a disruption to be contained. He slumped slightly in his seat, stunned. The public announcement had transformed him from a passenger into a warning sign. Just as Coraline returned to the galley, a voice rose from 3D, 2 rows behind Lennox. "Excuse me," a man called, his tone panicked. "Miss, something's wrong, I think I'm having a panic attack." Heads turned again, but this time the atmosphere shifted. Coraline reacted immediately. She pivoted, rushed down the aisle with purpose. "Sir, just stay calm. We're here to help." Her voice now held warmth, a tone reserved for fragile glass. She knelt beside the man who was white, mid-30s, dressed in business attire but visibly shaken. Coraline snapped her fingers to the junior flight attendant. "Water. And bring a blanket." Lennox watched in stunned silence as they pampered the new panic patient with the very care he'd begged for minutes earlier. Coraline placed a hand on the man's shoulder, whispering soft reassurances, adjusting his headrest, even dimming the cabin lights slightly. The junior attendant returned with the requested items and tucked the blanket around the man's legs. "We've got you, sir. Take slow breaths. You're doing great." Lennox blinked slowly, his vision blurring, not from tears, but from the sheer weight of the contrast. There it was, proof that the issue was never about procedure. It had never been about safety protocols, about disruption, or about regulations. It had been about him, about what he looked like, about who they thought deserved comfort and who didn't. A few passengers even offered sympathetic glances to the man in 3D. One reached over with her own water bottle. The man nodded gratefully, holding it with shaking hands. Coraline stood slowly and smiled, even patted his shoulder before turning back toward the front of the plane. As she passed Lennox, her gaze didn't linger. No acknowledgement, no words, no apology. Just silence. The divide between them had never been more pronounced. One panic attack had inspired compassion, while the other had been met with mockery. The message was clear: only some people are allowed to be vulnerable at 35,000 feet. A low murmur drifted through the cabin as people resumed their distractions. The curtain between first class and the main cabin fluttered briefly from a breeze. Lennox remained frozen in his seat. He felt small, unseen, discarded. He looked down at his hands. They had stopped trembling, not because the panic was gone, but because numbness had taken its place. The fire of humiliation had burned so intensely that it had turned to ash. The junior attendant passed again, carrying another bottle of water. She glanced down at him this time. Their eyes met briefly. She hesitated, slowing her pace, but said nothing. Then she moved on. Another chance for kindness, lost to fear or complicity. The silence of a room full of people who had witnessed injustice and decided it wasn't their problem. Lennox had stopped pressing buttons, stopped asking, but his condition hadn't improved. The numbness in his fingertips spread down his arms, and a hot wave of nausea rolled through his stomach. He needed to move, not far, just to stretch his legs, to go to the restroom, maybe splash cold water on his face. Something, anything, to interrupt the spiral clawing at his nerves. He unbuckled his belt quietly, the faint click lost beneath the hum of engines. He waited, watching for Coraline, hoping she was at the front galley again. Then he rose slowly, gripping the armrest to steady himself. His knees felt like glass. His legs, two tight ropes straining to hold up everything he could no longer carry. But before he could take a full step, Coraline appeared out of nowhere. She blocked his path, stepping in front of him like a wall in a uniform. Her arms crossed, her mouth twisted into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And where you think you're going?" she asked, voice soft but sharp as broken glass. Lennox opened his mouth, tried to answer, but the words came out hoarse. "Just restroom. Just need to breathe." She leaned in close, far too close, placing one hand firmly on his shoulder and forcing him gently but undeniably back toward a seat. "You're embarrassing yourself," she whispered with venom. "Sit down." Lennox's breath hitched. The pressure from her hand was light, but the intent behind it was heavy. He wasn't a man in need of help in her eyes. He was a problem to be silenced, a disturbance to be shut down before anyone else noticed. And they were noticing. A woman in 1B glanced over the top of her tablet. The man in 2B stiffened. But no one said a word. Coraline's hand remained on his shoulder until he lowered himself, defeated, back into the seat. "Thank you," she said aloud, her voice now loud and bright. "We want everyone to be safe and seated during the flight. Please let us know if you need anything at all." The words dripped with false sweetness, a mask over the venom. Then she walked away. Lennox sat frozen, jaw tight, hands curled in his lap. That was it. That was his final attempt at autonomy, at dignity, and it had been crushed like a bug under Coraline's heel. He felt stripped down to nothing. Not a man, not a passenger, just an inconvenience wrapped in a suit. Then, from the side, a hand gently touched the edge of his armrest. He turned. It was the junior flight attendant, the same one Coraline had dismissed earlier. She crouched slightly, keeping her voice low, her expression cautious. "Sir," she whispered, "would you like me to get you water? I can bring you one of the medical masks. Sometimes they help regulate breathing." Quietly, Lennox looked at her. Her eyes were kind, but also scared. She wasn't just helping him. She was risking something. He nodded once, barely moving his head. She gave a quick nod in return, stood, and began to move toward the galley. But before she could take 3 steps, Coraline's voice sliced through the silence. "Kayla," she called, firm and commanding. "May I speak to you?" The younger woman stopped. She turned slowly, then walked back toward the front where Coraline stood waiting. They disappeared behind the curtain for less than 30 seconds. When Kayla returned, her face had changed. Her smile was gone. Her eyes avoided Lennox's. She walked past him without stopping, hands folded in front of her, her posture stiff. Whatever had been said behind that curtain had worked. Coraline emerged next, brushing the curtain aside and flashing a smug smile as she passed Lennox's row. "Sorry for the delay," she said casually. "We're just making sure all crew members understand the proper chain of command." She winked, a wink, as if they were sharing a joke. Lennox turned to the window again, stomach churning. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. This was strategic erasure, gaslighting. Every attempt to advocate for himself, every plea, every movement was twisted into something dangerous, something disruptive, something foolish. Even the person who had tried to help him had been punished, folded back into obedience under threat. And the passengers? They watched. They listened. They glanced and whispered. But none had intervened. They weren't neutral. They were complicit. Lennox felt the shame rise again, this time thick and burning. He bit the inside of his cheek to keep from reacting, to keep from crying, yelling, panicking. Coraline had set a trap, one he couldn't escape. If he stayed quiet, he suffered. If he spoke, he confirmed her narrative. The perfect prison. And it was working. An hour passed. Then, too, Lennox didn't move. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He didn't ask for anything. When the attendants came around with meals, Coraline served everyone in first class with professional grace. When she reached him, she placed the tray with a clatter. "Chicken or beef?" she said, not bothering to meet his eyes. "Beef," he answered, voice thin. She dumped the tray in front of him. "Enjoy." He ate none of it, just stared at it, trying not to let his hands shake. The man across the aisle gave him a once-over and muttered, "Should have just taken the train if he can't handle a flight." The woman beside him laughed. He couldn't remember the last time he had drawn a full breath. The stillness he'd forced on himself to avoid further humiliation now strangled him from the inside out. He hadn't moved in nearly 3 hours, hadn't spoken, hadn't eaten. His fingers were ice, his lips dry, his head swimming with lightness that no longer felt like fear, but something far more dangerous, defeat. Every second stretched like a needle, slowly driving into his skin. Kayla hadn't looked at him again. Coraline had grown even more comfortable, her cruelty casual now, her tone more relaxed as she laughed with the front row passengers over wine and biscotti. The power imbalance had grown so tilted it was no longer a question of authority. It was a game, and Lennox was the joke that kept giving. As the cabin lights brightened slightly for the mid-flight wine service, Coraline pushed her cart with ease, serving white wine and laughter in equal measure. The couple in 1A asked for red. She poured with a graceful flick of the wrist and commented on the vintage, then moved down the aisle. The closer she came to Lennox, the more he felt his heart twist, as if bracing for impact. He could no longer feel his toes. His head throbbed. He needed to move. He needed air. Without realizing it, he unbuckled his belt again. The click was louder this time, his fingers clumsy. He stood, slowly, the world teetering like a ship on rough waters. His vision blurred. His legs wobbled. He stepped into the aisle, just a single foot forward. But the motion was too much. Too late. His body gave out. The floor met him like a wave. He crumpled sideways, his right shoulder hitting the ground first, his briefcase slipping from under the seat and clattering beside him. The cabin gasped in unison. Coraline paused. Her cart came to a halt 2 feet from where Lennox lay, curled on his side, his chest heaving erratically. She stared at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she pushed the cart forward, her heel lifting to step over his body. Literally, without a word, she stepped over him like a piece of luggage in the aisle, careful not to spill the glass in her hand. "Cabin service must continue," she said flatly to no one in particular. "He's not unconscious." Behind her, murmurs erupted. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Is she serious?" a woman asked. "That's not right." But no one moved. No one stopped her. Lennox lay on the floor, one cheek pressed to the carpet, eyes half open, breath scraping in and out. The world spun around him. Then a voice cut through the haze, sharp, female, firm. "I'm a nurse," said the woman in 4C. She stood, bracing herself against the overhead bin, and stepped into the aisle. "He needs medical attention. Now." Coraline turned slowly. Her smile was still plastered on, but it no longer reached her eyes. "Ma'am," she said with artificial calm, "please return to your seat. We have protocols. Flight operations cannot be interrupted." The nurse ignored her. She crouched beside Lennox, feeling his pulse, checking his eyes. "He's tachycardic," she said immediately. "You ignored the warning signs. This man is in the middle of a serious medical emergency." Coraline didn't flinch. Interfering with flight operations can result in federal charges. "You want to get off in handcuffs." The nurse looked up in disbelief. "Are you threatening me for helping someone who's collapsed?" Coraline leaned closer. "You are not authorized medical crew. Sit down." But the nurse didn't move. She cradled Lennox's head, whispering to him, calling for water, for ice, for anyone who would listen. Kayla appeared at the edge of the aisle, her eyes wide, her hands twitching with uncertainty. She held the bottle of water, but didn't move until the nurse turned to her directly. "You," the nurse said, "get me a cool cloth now." Kayla looked toward Coraline. Coraline glared. "Kayla," she said quietly, "I told you, I don't care," Kayla said, finally snapping. "This is wrong." She disappeared down the aisle. Coraline's jaw clenched. She stood motionless, wine still in one hand, her other fist tightening against her hip. The passengers were watching now, really watching. Phones appeared. Whispers turned to judgment. The tone had shifted. Something had broken. The illusion that Coraline controlled the narrative had shattered. For a moment, she realized the situation had spun beyond her command. Still, she refused to show it. She dropped the glass of wine back into the cart and marched to the cockpit. Lennox blinked slowly, pain lacing his chest. The nurse stroked his shoulder gently. "Stay with me," she whispered. "You're okay now. You're not alone." Kayla returned with the cloth, pressing it into Lennox's forehead. Then came the words, spoken when she thought no one else would hear them. Standing in the galley with her back turned slightly, Coraline said, "What a waste of a seat. He's milking this like it's an audition." Her voice wasn't raised, but it was clear. Too clear. Declan uploaded the clip to his social media, adding only a short caption. This flight attendant stepped over a man having a panic attack and said this. The upload took less than a minute, and within the hour, the post began to gather traction. Declan hadn't expected much, maybe a few retweets, some outrage. But by the time the plane began its descent, the post had exploded. Notifications flooded his screen. Influencers reposted it. Activists tagged the airline. Comments poured in by the thousands. Hashtag Justice for Lennox began trending. On the aircraft, though, none of this was known to Coraline. She returned to her robotic routine, going through the motions with rehearsed detachment. When the pilot announced the final approach, passengers began preparing for landing, but there was an undercurrent of unease. Eyes kept darting toward the front, toward Lennox, who now lay quietly with a pillow under his head and a blanket placed over him by Kayla, who sat crouched by the galley door, hands clenched in her lap, her nerves frayed and conscience raw. The nurse who had intervened earlier remained seated now, but her eyes stayed locked on Coraline, her jaw set. There was no more trust here, just exposure. The plane touched down with a jolt. The tires screeched against the runway, and the reverse thrusters roared. But inside the cabin, the stillness returned. The chime rang out. Seat belts clicked open. As the aircraft rolled toward the gate, Coraline picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said with brittle cheer, "please remain seated as medical professionals board to assist a passenger. There is no danger. We appreciate your cooperation." She hung up and glanced toward the back of the cabin, ignoring the phone in her pocket that had started to buzz. She didn't notice the looks, didn't hear the whispers, and certainly didn't see Declan's post gathering momentum by the second. The plane came to a full stop at the gate. The doors opened. 2 paramedics stepped aboard, quickly making their way to 2A. Lennox remained still, his face pale, his breathing shallow. The nurse gestured toward him. "He's been tachycardic for over an hour. He collapsed mid-flight. He's been unresponsive at times. He needs oxygen, fluids, and monitoring." The lead medic nodded. "We'll take it from here." Coraline stood beside the cart, arms folded, her expression unreadable. When one of the medics turned to her for a briefing, she shrugged. "He never lost consciousness. We have no verified medical condition. This looks like a panic stunt. Honestly, he may be doing it for attention or a lawsuit." The medic blinked. "That's not your call to make." "I've seen this before," Coraline replied coolly. "Some people fake things to get compensated." Behind them, passengers stirred. Kayla stared at the floor. The nurse's fists clenched. Declan opened his phone again and started recording. He captured Coraline's words this time, along with the medic's reaction. The second clip went up online just as quickly. As Lennox was lifted onto a stretcher, murmurs spread louder across the cabin. A woman in 2B stood and spoke aloud. You all saw it. She did nothing when he was in distress. She mocked him, lied about him. Coraline turned. "Excuse me." "You're not excused," the woman shot back. "We all heard you." "Ma'am," Coraline said sharply, "you're out of line." "And you," the woman replied, "are out of a job." At the terminal, another crew waited. An airline supervisor had been alerted, ironically not by the flight report, but by a trending post that had reached over 5 million views by the time Lennox was wheeled out. A representative approached the plane door, looking around. "Which one is Coraline Wexler?" Coraline raised her chin. "That's me. We need to speak. Now." She looked puzzled. "What is this about?" "You'll find out. Please step off the aircraft with me." "I have duties to complete." "Now," he repeated, his voice firm. Passengers whispered as Coraline exited, her posture tense, her expression hard. The nurse followed Lennox out, walking beside the stretcher. Kayla stood behind, silent, but her eyes filled with something new. Not fear, but resolution. Back in the cabin, phones continued buzzing. Screens lit up. Oxygen flowed gently into his nose through soft plastic tubing, and though his breathing had begun to normalize, the psychological weight remained unbearable. His suit, once crisp and commanding, was now rumpled and damp with sweat. His dignity had taken blow after blow, and as he lay there with his eyes closed, trying to shut out the memories of Caroline Wechsler stepping over his prone body and dismissing his condition as theatrics, he felt the simmering sting of injustice boiling just beneath the surface. There was no room in his mind for anything but silence, until the door flew open with a burst of commotion. "Where is he?" a voice barked, sharp and unmistakably authoritative. "Where's Mr. Hale?" Heads turned. The lead medic stepped aside as a tall, silver-haired man in a navy blazer bearing the airline's crest strode in with urgency and unease radiating from every step. A smaller man in a gray suit trailed behind him, holding a clipboard and a tablet. The blazer stopped at the foot of Lennox's bed, breath hitching when he saw the patient's face. "Mr. Hale," he said, his voice a pitch lower, now full of dread. I had no idea you were scheduled today. My God, we weren't alerted." Lennox opened his eyes slowly. He blinked, recognizing the man through a fog of fatigue and disbelief. It took only a second for the pieces to align, and the reaction was immediate. The room shifted. The attending nurse stiffened, looking between the men. The medics froze. "Mr. Hale," the man repeated, clearly panicking now. "I'm Director Marcus DeWitt. I oversee Southeastern Regional Operations. We were told the FAA would be sending an auditor in Q3, but we didn't have you flagged for this flight. If we had known, you would have treated me differently." Lennox's voice was barely above a whisper, but it was razor sharp. "If I hadn't collapsed, you wouldn't have known at all." DeWitt swallowed hard. "No, that's not what Then why are you here now?" The smaller man with the clipboard stepped forward, already reading from a tablet. "Federal Aviation Administration, Office of Internal Compliance. Lennox Hale, appointed flight auditor for Q2, Q3 compliance checks. Flight 739 was one of 3 surprise audits scheduled within this inspection window." The nurse gasped. One of the medics whispered, "Oh, damn." DeWitt's face turned a shade paler. "We had no idea." "You weren't supposed to," Lennox said, sitting up slowly. "That's the point of a compliance check." The silence in the room grew thick, heavier than the oxygen pumping into the tubing. DeWitt ran a hand through his hair, trying to maintain composure, but it was too late. The name Lennox Hale had gone from unknown passenger to FAA enforcer in less than 60 seconds, and the implication was nuclear. Coraline hadn't just mistreated a passenger. She had humiliated, endangered, and ignored a federal official mid-flight, one with the authority to file immediate violations, recommend disciplinary actions, and submit findings that could impact licensing and legal compliance for the airline. DeWitt turned to the nurse. "He needs anything, make sure he has it. Don't let him move until we've sorted this." Lennox waved off the comment. "I'm not your concern now, Director. The facts will speak for themselves." DeWitt opened his mouth to argue, but the door swung open again. A young employee holding a phone rushed in. "Sir, the footage, it's gone viral. 2 videos. One of the flight attendants stepping over him, and another where she calls him a liar and a waste of a seat. It's everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. It's in the news now." DeWitt looked at Lennox, horrified. "We'll launch an internal investigation immediately." "You'll do more than that," Lennox said flatly. "Because I already have." Outside the exam room, the ripple effect of Lennox's identity was spreading fast. Supervisors shouted into radios. Public relations officers scrambled. Staff who had once walked past him now whispered his name like it was radioactive. The junior attendant, Kayla, was found crying quietly in a break room, terrified that her defiance of Coraline would lead to termination. But that was before she was informed of Lennox's title. Her eyes widened. He's the FA. The HR manager nodded. "And he remembered your name." Inside the terminal, Coraline Wechsler sat in a private conference room with 2 senior HR officials and a representative from legal. Her phone, now buzzing nonstop, sat face down on the table. Her face was tight with stubbornness. "This is being blown out of proportion." He faked that collapse. "I've seen it before." One of the HR officials interrupted. "That man is not just a passenger. He's the FAA's regional flight auditor. And you didn't just mistreat him, You did so on camera." Coraline laughed once, bitter. "So what now? I get written up." "You may have violated federal protocol, Coraline," the legal rep said coldly. "There's nothing minor about this. We could be looking at license risk, fines, and lawsuits. You've put this airline under direct federal scrutiny." She stared at them, finally understanding the scope. He didn't say who he was. He didn't have to, the HR officer snapped. "Your job was to treat every passenger with respect, not just the ones you thought mattered." Lennox Hale stepped out slowly, dressed sharply in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable beneath mirrored sunglasses. The past 72 hours had been a maelstrom of press coverage, internal leaks, and public outrage, but Lennox had remained silent, declining interviews and refusing to engage in the media frenzy. Today he would speak, but not to cameras. Today was about accountability, not performance. He entered the building with quiet authority, escorted by 2 FAA compliance liaisons who carried briefcases filled with documentation, flight logs, crew manifests, and cross-referenced FAA regulation citations. Upstairs, in the conference room that had hosted the airline's most delicate decisions, the board waited with unease. 10 executives sat at a sleek oval table, their expressions guarded, some visibly tense. At the far end stood Marcus DeWitt, the regional director who had first rushed into the airport medical suite in a panic. Next to him was the general counsel, and beside her, a senior HR officer who now clutched a printed transcript of the viral clips, annotated in red. The door opened. Lennox entered without hesitation. His presence silenced the room instantly. DeWitt stepped forward, offering a handshake. "Mr. Hale, thank you for coming." Lennox accepted the shake but said nothing. He moved to the head of the table where a seat had been reserved for him and his team. One of the FAA liaisons handed him a leather-bound folder, and he opened it slowly, spreading the first set of documents in front of him with precise care. A few board members shifted in their seats. Then the door opened again. Coraline Wexler stepped in, flanked by 2 HR representatives. Her expression was tight, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Lennox. The color drained from her face. She stopped mid-step. "You," she whispered. One of the HR reps nudged her gently forward. "Please take a seat." Coraline sat stiffly, her eyes darting between Lennox and the executives, as if trying to gauge just how deep the damage was. She knew the videos had gone viral. She knew the airline had placed her under administrative review. But what she hadn't known, until this very moment, was that the man she had mocked, restrained, dismissed, and literally stepped over was the FAA official with the power to dismantle careers and shatter reputations with a single clause. Lennox didn't speak immediately. He allowed the weight of the moment to stretch. Finally, he looked up, eyes piercing. "Before I begin, I want to state clearly that I did not come on Flight 739 with an agenda. My assignment was routine: observe, assess, and report on operational and compliance behaviors during standard service. What happened instead was a cascade of misconduct that violated not only FAA policies but fundamental decency." He clicked a button on a small remote, and the wall screen lit up with a digital flight log. This was a first-class cabin with 22 passengers. The subject under audit was this attendant. He gestured toward Coraline without looking at her. What began as a minor note regarding attitude turned into a full documentation of what I classify as targeted harassment, medical negligence, and discriminatory conduct. Coraline tried to interject, her voice brittle. "That's not. You will remain silent until I finish," Lennox said without raising his voice. She stopped immediately. At 8:06 a.m., shortly after boarding, I requested assistance for pre-flight nerves. I was dismissed with sarcasm and given mints. At 8:17 a.m., after displaying visible signs of respiratory distress, I was labeled a drama queen. This was within earshot of 4 passengers and recorded by one. He advanced the slide, revealing a time-stamped log and still image. At 8:35 a.m., after pressing the call button, I was told I was disrupting the cabin. An announcement was made painting me as a threat to other passengers, despite my only request being water or oxygen. A collective murmur ran through the boardroom. Lennox continued. At 9:10 a.m., another passenger, Caucasian male, 30s, experienced a panic attack. He was provided with water, a blanket, and verbal reassurance within 60 seconds. The discrepancy in treatment is documented, witnessed, and recorded. Coraline sat stiffly, face pale. Lennox pressed another button. At 9:47 a.m., after attempting to stand for physical relief, I was physically restrained and told I was embarrassing myself. Video evidence confirms contact was made with the intention of forced compliance. He shifted his gaze directly to Coraline now. You placed your hand on me, uninvited, and pushed me back into my seat. One of the board members closed her eyes. Another began writing quickly. At 11:14 a.m., I collapsed in the aisle. You stepped over me to serve wine. You told a colleague on record that I was a waste of a seat. You dismissed a certified nurse who offered medical assistance, threatened her with ejection, and continued to claim I was faking it for a lawsuit, all while unaware I was the one assigned to assess your crew's compliance and safety standards. The silence now was suffocating. Lennox closed a folder and looked around the table. This isn't just about me. This is about a pattern that exists because you assume power protects you, that your uniform gives you immunity. But the public saw the truth, and the FAA has too. DeWitt cleared his throat. Mr. Hale, we're prepared to take every corrective measure. This is not a negotiation, Lennox said. The full report is being submitted within the hour. Your flight attendant violated 7 FAA codes, 3 OSHA guidelines, and at least 2 state-level health mandates. Your compliance officer failed to flag her pattern of complaints, which I now have documented. Your crew culture has enabled selective compassion, and you've trained some of your best people to stay silent rather than risk reprimand. Coraline's voice cracked. I didn't know who you were. Lennox stood slowly. You shouldn't have to. That's the point. He turned to the HR officer. She will never fly again. If she does, the FAA will take action against the license that certifies her. Then he faced the board. The penalty was swift, public, and precedent-setting. Within minutes of the FAA's press release, cameras lined the sidewalk outside the airline's headquarters. News crews jockeyed for space as reporters from national networks and aviation watchdogs delivered live coverage of what was now being dubbed the Flight 739 scandal. Coraline Wexler's name had trended across all major platforms. Her photo, initially taken from a LinkedIn profile, then matched with viral clips, had become the face of unchecked authority and systemic cruelty. That afternoon, the Federal Aviation Administration issued an internal bulletin reaffirming the legal and ethical obligations of in-flight personnel to treat all passengers equally, regardless of perceived status or demeanor. The bulletin cited Hale's report directly, labeling his documentation exceptionally thorough and irrefutable. By then, the public appetite for accountability had grown voracious. Passengers from Flight 739 began speaking out, some voluntarily stepping forward to share their experiences from the cabin. The woman from 2B, Marissa Lyle, gave a tearful interview on national television, saying, "We all saw it. We knew it was wrong. I didn't know who missed her. Hale was at the time, but that shouldn't have mattered. Watching him get ignored and mocked. I've never felt so ashamed." Declan Rios, the young man who posted the first video, was interviewed by multiple networks. "I just couldn't believe what I was seeing," he told one journalist. "I thought if I didn't film it, no one would believe it happened. Turns out, it helped start something bigger." Coraline herself had been placed on indefinite unpaid leave immediately after the boardroom confrontation, but that status didn't last long. By the end of the week, the airline's HR department released a statement announcing the permanent revocation of her employment. Simultaneously, the FAA declared her flight credentials suspended pending further review, which insiders confirmed was a bureaucratic precursor to a full disqualification from ever working in commercial aviation again. It wasn't just Coraline who faced the fallout. The supervisory chain that had enabled her behavior, those who failed to flag her past passenger complaints, who ignored Kayla's earlier reports, came under investigation. Several mid-level managers were reassigned. One compliance officer quietly resigned. Internally, the airline instituted emergency retraining for all in-flight crew on medical responsiveness, anti-bias procedures, and de-escalation methods. But no change came more rapidly or more visibly than the company's attempt at public atonement. On the third day after Lennox's identity went public, the airline held a press conference at its main terminal, the backdrop carefully curated with company logos and executives dressed in conservative suits. At the center stood CEO Natalie Dyer, who had, until now, remained silent during the media storm. Her tone was serious, her demeanor unflinching. "We failed," she said, her voice echoing through a sea of microphones. What occurred on Flight 739 was not just a breach of protocol. It was a breach of humanity. Mr. Lennox Hale was subjected to treatment no passenger, no person should ever endure. For that, we offer not just apology, but change. She outlined the actions taken: the fine, the dismissal, the retraining, the new oversight protocols. When asked whether the company had reached out to Lennox for a joint appearance or a press engagement, Dyer paused. "We did," she said. He declined. "He told us this was never about me. It was about what we allow." That quote alone led the next news cycle. Analysts called it one of the most powerful statements made in a corporate accountability case in years. Commentators praised Lennox's restraint, his refusal to make himself the center of a story that had become about something far larger. Behind the scenes, Lennox remained characteristically quiet. He had returned to his home outside Washington, D.C., declining interview requests and public appearances. Those close to him said he was exhausted but resolute. "He wants the system to work," one colleague told a journalist. He didn't blow a whistle. He followed the rules. The fact that it took a viral video to get people to believe him, that says everything about why this mattered. FAA officials continued to praise his documentation and composure under pressure. He did what we hope every auditor would do, one regional manager told a trade publication. But more than that, he showed what integrity looks like under fire. Meanwhile, Kayla, the junior attendant who had attempted to help Lennox mid-flight and been reprimanded for it, was quietly transferred to a different route and promoted to senior attendant status. The airline issued her an apology and cited her name in internal memos as an example of ethical conduct under pressure. In one of the few private communications Lennox sent after the ordeal, he thanked her. "You made a choice when it counted," the message read. "Don't let anyone take that from you." Public sentiment was overwhelmingly on Lennox's side. Social media flooded with support, artwork, and hashtags dedicated to his quiet strength. Activist groups pointed to his case as a pivotal example of how racism, when allowed to exist unchecked in professional settings, festers into violence and dehumanization. "This wasn't a mistake," one advocacy leader said. "This was the result of a system that protects arrogance and punishes vulnerability until someone powerful enough calls it out." For Coraline, the consequences didn't stop with her career. Her face had become a symbol of failure. Former colleagues began distancing themselves. News outlets began publishing earlier passenger complaints, unearthed through anonymous leaks. A particularly damning report revealed that her file had contained 6 prior warnings about dismissive or unprofessional conduct, all brushed aside by supervisors now facing scrutiny. Lawsuits were filed. Civil rights organizations reached out to Lennox offering legal support, but he declined most. "This isn't about winning money," he said in a closed-door session with the government ethics board. "It's about fixing what's broken." And while he never took the stage at any of the press events, his presence was felt everywhere. His words were quoted by senators. His report was discussed in aviation oversight committees. His story became a case study for flight crews in training sessions around the country. In the end, Coraline wasn't escorted out in handcuffs. There were no screaming confrontations, no courtroom showdowns. Just the slow, irrevocable collapse of power built on arrogance, dismantled by the quiet precision of truth. 6 months had passed since the headlines faded, since the hashtags slowed their rotation on social media feeds, and the world turned its eyes to the next crisis, the next injustice, the next name to elevate or condemn. The storm that had erupted around Flight 739 had settled into something else entirely, an echo, not quite gone, yet no longer screaming. For most, it was another chapter closed. But for Coraline Wexler, the ending hadn't come with silence. It had come with a long, slow noise of reckoning. Her termination had been immediate, final. The FAA revocation notice came in a plain envelope, but its weight could have buckled a steel beam. Her savings dwindled. Her name flagged across airlines nationwide. Job applications returned no calls. The industry she had devoted 15 years to had erased her with a swiftness that stunned even her. What remained was something she hadn't felt in years: stillness. And within that stillness, discomfort. Coraline didn't apologize publicly. She didn't craft a viral statement or hire a PR firm. She didn't write a memoir or attempt a comeback. Instead, she did the things she had never done. Not once, not even when her first warning landed years ago. She listened. At first, the silence was brutal. Her apartment felt too loud with nothing but her thoughts. So she started writing, not for anyone else, but for herself. Page after page of reflection, then research, then self-examination. She read Lennox Hale's report 3 times, line by line. She watched the footage of herself stepping over him until her stomach churned. Not with outrage or embarrassment, but with something far heavier: recognition. There was no excuse for what she'd done. No justification for the condescension, the cruelty, the calculated indifference. It wasn't protocol. It was prejudice. Not the loud kind, not the kind that marches in parades of hate, but the quiet institutional kind that whispers, "This one doesn't matter," and convinces you it's normal. Coraline realized she had believed in that lie for years. So she got help. Therapy wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. She found a counselor who specialized in implicit bias and professional misconduct, someone who didn't coddle her, but didn't condemn her either. Through hard conversations and harder truths, Coraline peeled back the layers she'd built up over a lifetime in customer service, where power was often used as a shield and entitlement wore the mask of professionalism. Her counselor asked her once, "When did you first stop seeing passengers as people?" Coraline didn't have an answer, but she thought about it every night. After 2 months, she started volunteering. Not for appearances, she had no social capital left to save, but because it was the first time in years she felt useful. She worked at a local community outreach center, helping organize travel logistics for low-income individuals needing medical transport. At first, it felt like a mockery of her old life, but slowly, it became something else: penance. The people she met reminded her of what she'd lost long before the flight: the ability to see humanity first. The director of the center, a stern woman named Patrice, didn't care about Coraline's past. She cared that she showed up, stayed late, followed through. One evening, after months of consistency, Patrice said, "You treat people right here. Just make sure you treat yourself the same way." That stuck. Meanwhile, Lennox Hale had returned to the rhythm of federal work, but his path had shifted subtly. He was promoted, yes, but more than that, he became a quiet advocate behind closed doors, helping the FAA strengthen its equity initiatives, urging the development of new passenger rights standards and mentoring younger auditors on how to maintain integrity under fire. He never gave speeches. He didn't attend red carpet events or accept awards, but his presence was requested at every significant policy meeting related to in-flight accountability. His name, once whispered with awe or fear, became synonymous with quiet reform. Then came the conference. It was billed as a cross-industry forum on ethics in transportation, hosted by a nonprofit collaboration between aviation safety boards and human rights organizations. Coraline attended not as a speaker, not as a panelist, but as a participant. She had enrolled months prior under her legal name, no longer interested in hiding, but also not demanding to be seen. She sat in the back of each seminar, took notes, asked thoughtful questions when the time allowed. No one recognized her, or perhaps they did and chose not to react. On the final day, the panel on restoring public trust in aviation featured 4 speakers. One of them was Lennox Hale. Coraline had debated skipping it. She had prepared herself for the sting of seeing him again, unsure what emotion would rise: shame, regret, maybe a desperate hope for redemption. But she went. The room was full. Lennox took the stage with his usual quiet command. Dressed in a navy suit, no tie, his posture straight but unassuming. He spoke without notes. Integrity in service, he said, isn't about how we behave when we know someone's watching. It's about how we respond when no one is. He paused, scanning the room slowly. Injustice often doesn't wear a villain's face. It wears a uniform, a badge, a smile. Sometimes it hides behind protocol. Other times it's silence. Our job is to interrupt it, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs us something. Coraline's throat tightened. His words didn't accuse. They didn't attack, but they landed like truth always does, undeniable and echoing. When the panel ended, Lennox stepped down and walked toward the exit. Coraline didn't approach. She didn't know what she would say. What could she say that wouldn't sound like self-preservation? But fate didn't need dialogue. As Lennox passed her row, he paused. He turned his head slightly. Their eyes met. There was no anger in his expression, no triumph, just a moment, a shared understanding that growth, if genuine, begins where denial ends. He nodded, just once. Coraline nodded back. It was not forgiveness. It was not approval. It was something purer, acknowledgement, that people can change. That truth, when faced honestly, can be transformative. Months later, when Coraline was asked to speak to a class of aspiring flight attendants about ethics, she opened with this: "Your job is to serve. But never mistake service for superiority. The moment you decide someone is less worthy of dignity, you've already failed." I learned that the hard way. I hope you don't have to. And somewhere far from the cameras, Lennox Hale continued his work, not as a hero, but as a man who had once been unheard and chose not to stay silent. His legacy wasn't in what he endured. It was in what he changed. The end. Thanks for reading this powerful story to the end. If you found the message meaningful or the twist gripping, make sure to like and subscribe for more intense, thought-provoking narratives. I'd love to hear what you think. What was your favorite plot twist? And how did the story make you feel? Were you surprised by the redemption arc? Or did Lennox's quiet strength resonate most? Let me know where you're watching from and drop your thoughts in the comments. Every share helps stories like this reach more people, and your voice matters.